Picture this. You're throwing your husband a birthday party, pouring your heart into every detail. Cake, lights, laughter, only to catch him kissing your sister in your own garage. Then, years later, your mom calls after a long silence, stirring up ghosts you thought you'd buried. I'm Jessica Harper, 34, a nurse from Boston, who thought family meant everything, until they tore it apart. This is how I lost them and found myself. Stick around. Karma's a quiet storm, and it hit them hard. I used to think I had it all figured out. 5 years ago, I was a nurse at Mass General Hospital, my hands steady as I drew blood or adjusted IVs, my heart steady with the life I'd built. My husband, David, was the kind of man who turned heads. Tall, with dark hair that fell just right over his forehead, sharp blue eyes, and a cardiologist's confidence that made him a star at work. We met in the hospital cafeteria one spring day, him in his crisp white coat, me fumbling with a coffee cup. "Mind if I sit?" he'd asked, his smile disarming. I didn't. That was the start. Lunch chats turned into dinners, walks along the Charles River, and a proposal under falling maple leaves. I said yes, tears blurring my vision as he slid the ring on my finger. My mom, Diane, clapping with pride at our small wedding in a Back Bay church. Then there was Natalie, my sister. She was everything I wasn't. Tall like a runway model, blonde hair teased into perfect waves, always draped in designer clothes that screamed money. She sold luxury homes, hobnobbed with Boston's elite, and plastered her life on Instagram. Champagne flutes, European getaways, a new BMW every year. Growing up, I'd envied her sparkle, but I loved her too. She was my big sister, my maid of honor, the one who'd tease me about my boring scrubs, but still hug me tight. And Mom, Diane, she was our anchor. Petite like me, with graying brown hair pulled into a neat bun, her hazel eyes soft but wise. After Dad died 3 years ago, she'd retreated into herself, gardening quietly in our old Victorian house. I thought she'd always have my back. I was wrong. It was 2022, David's 35th birthday. I'd spent days planning, string lights twinkling in our South End brownstone, a chocolate cake I'd baked myself, his favorite IPA chilling in buckets, guests milled around, colleagues from the hospital laughing over beers, my coworker Lisa nudging me with a grin. "You're too good to him, Jess," she said, her short black hair catching the light. I laughed it off, brushing my long brown hair behind my ear, feeling proud in my simple navy dress. The night hummed with warmth, until it didn't. I needed more ice. The kitchen was empty, so I slipped into the garage, the cold concrete biting my bare feet. That's when I saw them. David and Natalie, pressed against his workbench, her arms around his neck, his lips on hers. My breath caught, a sharp gasp slicing the air. They froze, turning to me like deer in headlights. David's blue eyes narrowed, his mouth twisting into a smirk. "You're too plain, Jess," he said, voice cold as steel. Natalie's laugh cut deeper, her red lipstick smeared, her green eyes glinting. "He's mine now, little sis." I stood there, chest tight, the ice bag slipping from my hands, cubes scattering across the floor like my life breaking apart. I stumbled back inside, the party noise a dull roar in my ears. Lisa found me by the sink, gripping the counter, tears burning my eyes. "Jess, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. I couldn't speak, just pointed toward the garage. She peeked out, her jaw dropping. "Oh, hell no," she muttered, pulling me into a hug. I barely felt it, my mind spinning. How long? How could they? The guests left, oblivious, and I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, Natalie's laugh echoing in my skull. Next morning, I called Mom. My voice shook as I spilled it all. David, Natalie, the garage. I waited for her comfort, her outrage. Instead, she sighed through the phone, her tone weary. "Men drift, Jessica. Don't overreact. He's still your husband." My stomach dropped. "Mom, he cheated. With Natalie, at his party." Silence then. "You'll figure it out. You always do." She hung up, no anger, no support, just a shrug across the line. I sat there, phone limp in my hand, the betrayal sinking deeper. My husband, my sister, my mother. They'd all turned their backs, and I felt like a fool for ever trusting them. That week, I packed a suitcase, scrubs, jeans, Dad's old sweater, and left. David didn't fight it, just signed the divorce papers with a flick of his pen, his smirk never fading. Natalie posted a photo that night. Her and David at some rooftop bar, captioned, "New Beginnings." My phone buzzed with pity texts from coworkers, but I ignored them, renting a cramped studio near Mass General. At work, Natalie's voice haunted the halls. She'd drop by David's office, her heels clicking, her whispers loud enough for me to hear. Jess couldn't keep up. I kept my head down, my brown hair a curtain over my face, my hazel eyes, Mom's eyes, hiding the hurt. Lisa stayed close, her quick wit cutting through my fog. "They're trash, Jess. You're gold," she'd say, shoving coffee into my hands. I clung to that, but the pain gnawed at me. Every shift, every night alone, every memory of Mom's roses wilting without me there to tend them. 3 years passed like that. Me, my work, my silence. Dad's death still lingered, a quiet ache. They'd said it was a heart attack, sudden and sharp, but I'd always wondered why he'd gone so fast. Mom barely called. Natalie and David lived their loud, shiny lives, and I faded into my routine. Then, last week, my phone lit up. Mom. "Jess, we need a family meeting. Natalie's coming." My heart jolted, a mix of dread and curiosity tightening my chest. Why now? What did she want? I stared out my tiny window, the Boston skyline gray against the dusk, and felt it. A storm brewing, one I couldn't outrun. That night broke me, but it lit something too. They took my trust, my home. Then Mom's call dragged it all back. I fought with what I had, my wits and my will. Let's get into it. I left that week, the sting of David's smirk and Natalie's laugh still raw in my chest. Filing for divorce felt like signing away a piece of my soul, but I did it. Packed a suitcase with scrubs, jeans, and Dad's old gray sweater that still smelled faintly of his cologne. I left our South End brownstone behind, its string lights and chocolate cake crumbs a mocking memory, and rented a cramped studio near Mass General. The walls were thin, the radiator clanked, but it was mine. At work, Natalie's presence was a knife twist. She'd breeze into David's office, her heels clicking like a countdown, her voice carrying through the halls. Jess couldn't keep up with us, could she? I'd duck into supply closets, my long brown hair shielding my face, hazel eyes burning with tears I wouldn't let fall. My hands shook as I prepped IVs, but I kept going. 12-hour shifts, overtime, anything to drown the hurt. Lisa, my coworker, was my lifeline. Short, wiry, with black hair and a no-nonsense stare, she'd shove coffee at me and snap, "They're trash, Jess. You're gold. Don't forget it." I'd nod, forcing a smile, but inside I felt like a ghost, haunting my own life. Mom's silence cut deepest. After that call, "Men drift, Jessica." She faded away. No visits, no texts, just the occasional birthday card with a curt, "Love, Mom." I'd trace her handwriting, wondering how she could dismiss me so easily. Natalie and David, meanwhile, flaunted their victory. Rooftop bars, European trips, her Instagram a gallery of smug selfies captioned, "Living my best life." I scrolled past, my stomach knotting, but I didn't break. I saved every penny, built a wall around my heart, and let the years blur. 3 of them, each day a quiet battle to prove I didn't need them. Dad's death lingered like a shadow, a heart attack they'd said, sudden and final. I'd sat by his hospital bed back then, his breathing ragged, his hand cold in mine. I'd always wondered why we couldn't save him. He'd been a fighter, a mechanic who'd taught me to fix anything, but life moved on, or so I thought. Then, last week, my phone buzzed in the break room, mid-shift. "Mom" flashed on the screen, and my heart jolted, a mix of dread and something I couldn't name. I answered, my voice tight. "Jess, we need a family meeting," she said. Her tone clipped but heavy. "Natalie's coming. Tomorrow, my place." I gripped the phone, hazel eyes darting to the window where Boston's gray dusk pressed against the glass. "Why now, Mom?" I asked, but she just sighed. "You'll see?" The line went dead, and I stood there, pulse racing, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Lisa poked her head in, frowning. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I shook my head, tucking my hair behind my ear. "It's Mom. Something's up." She raised an eyebrow. "With that sister of yours? Watch your back, Jess." The next day, I took a taxi to Mom's Victorian house in Cambridge, the one I'd grown up in. The white fence gleamed, the rose bushes Dad had planted bare for winter. My steps dragged, my navy coat too thin against the chill. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old wood, the living room unchanged, family photos on the walls, Mom's classical music drifting from a speaker. She greeted me, petite like me, her graying brown hair in a bun, hazel eyes softer than I remembered, but edged with something resolute. "Glad you're here, Jess," she said, her voice steady. I nodded, uneasy, and sat on a single chair, hands clasped in my lap. The doorbell rang, and in they came. Natalie, heels clicking, blonde waves bouncing, her green eyes scanning the room like she owned it. David, tall and lean, dark hair swept back, blue eyes cold, his suit screaming money. "Still in scrubs, Jess?" Natalie quipped, smirking as she sank onto the sofa. David chuckled, loosening his tie. "Some things never change." I bit my tongue, my chest tightening, but Mom's gaze held me steady. She stood, slow and deliberate, and pulled a stack of files from Dad's old desk. "Sit down," she said, her voice cutting through their smugness. They exchanged a glance, Natalie's smirk faltering. "I've been digging," Mom began, laying out papers, bank statements, receipts, Dad's scrawled notes. "Your father didn't die of a heart attack. It was pneumonia, untreated, because you two drained his savings." My breath caught, a jolt of shock ripping through me. Natalie's face paled. David's jaw tightened. Mom kept going, her voice low but fierce. "You faked expenses, skipped his care. While he wasted away, you partied." She slid a photo across the table. Natalie and David at a bar. Time-stamped the day Dad died. My hands shook, tears prickling my eyes as I remembered his last raspy words. "Fix this, Jess." I hadn't known what he meant until now. "You're lying," Natalie snapped, but her voice wavered. David leaned forward. "This is nonsense, Diane." Mom ignored them, turning to me. "Jess, show them." I pulled my phone from my coat, hands trembling but sure, and opened the photos I'd kept. David and Natalie in the garage, lips locked, time-stamped 3 years ago. "You stole from Dad, then me," I said, my voice rising, sharp with years of buried rage. Mom added a USB drive to the pile. "His lawyer has copies, bank records, your texts dodging his calls. It's over." Natalie stood, her heels wobbling. "You can't do this." David grabbed her arm, his face ashen. "We'll fight it. Lawyers, everything." Mom's eyes blazed. "Try it. You get nothing." They turned to me, desperation cracking their masks. "Jess, please," Natalie begged, her voice shrill. "We're sorry," David muttered, eyes darting. I stood, my hazel eyes locking on theirs, steady for the first time in years. "You took enough," I said, and walked out, Mom beside me. The door slammed, their pleas muffled behind it. They thought I'd stay small, but I turned their lies against them. Mom saw it too. Here's how it ends. It's 2025 now, and I'm standing in Mom's garden, the roses Dad planted blooming red and pink under a soft spring sun. I'm head nurse at Mass General, my hands steadier than ever, my heart finally at peace. I live here now, in the old Victorian house in Cambridge, its white fence and creaky floors a quiet comfort. The past 3 years feel like a lifetime ago. David's smirk, Natalie's laugh, the garage where my world split open. They're gone from my life, shadows shrinking under the light I've built. Mom's with me too, her graying hair catching the breeze as she waters the plants, her hazel eyes softer now, healed by time and truth. We're enough, just us, and that's more than I ever thought I'd have again. After that night at Mom's, when we laid out the evidence, Dad's files, my photos, their lies, everything unraveled for them. David tried to fight it, his sharp blue eyes flashing as he called lawyers, but the hospital audits caught up fast. They found discrepancies in his billing, years of padding his hours, skimming funds, all tied back to the money he and Natalie had siphoned from Dad. His license was revoked, his name scrubbed from the cardiology roster. I heard from Lisa he's working at a walk-in clinic now, somewhere out in Worcester. His dark hair graying early, his suits traded for wrinkled polos. Natalie's fall was louder. Her real estate empire crumbled when clients ditched her, whispers of her betrayal spreading through Boston's elite. Her Instagram went silent. No more champagne or BMWs, just a faded profile selling condos in the suburbs. They're broke, alone. Their shiny life a pile of ash. They came crawling back once, about 6 months after the confrontation. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for Mom's apple pie, when the doorbell rang. I wiped flour off my hands, my long brown hair tied back, and opened the door to see them. Natalie, her blonde waves limp, green eyes dulled, her designer dress swapped for a cheap jacket. David, lean frame slouched, blue eyes pleading, a shadow of the man I'd loved. "Jess, we messed up," Natalie said, her voice small, cracking. "We're sorry. Help us, please." David nodded, hands in his pockets. "I lost everything. Take me back?" I stood there, hazel eyes steady, feeling the weight of their words, but no pull to fix them. The hurt was still there, a faint scar, but it didn't own me anymore. "You took enough," I said, my voice calm, final. "Live with it." I shut the door, their footsteps fading down the path, and turned back to Mom. She squeezed my shoulder, a silent, good girl, and we finished the pie together, the oven's warmth chasing out their ghosts. Mom's changed too. That meeting wasn't just about them, it was her reckoning. She'd found Dad's files by accident, stuffed in his old toolbox, months after he'd passed. "I should have seen it sooner, Jess," she told me one night, her voice trembling as we sat by the fireplace. "I let you down." I hugged her then, feeling her thin frame shake, and whispered, "You're here now." She's been making up for it since, gardening with me, cooking Dad's old recipes, her gentle strength blooming again. The roses are her pride, a tribute to him. And I tend them too. My hands in the dirt, a quiet way to keep him close. Lisa drops by sometimes, her sharp laugh filling the house. "Told you they'd crash," she said last week, sipping tea on the porch. "You're a badass, Jess." I smiled, brushing dirt off my jeans, and felt it. Pride, real and mine. Work's my anchor. The promotion to head nurse came last month, 7 years of grit paying off. My staff trusts me, patients too. An older man, Mr. Carter, grabbed my hand during rounds yesterday, his voice raspy. "You saved me back then, Miss Harper. Don't know how to thank you." I squeezed his hand, hazel eyes softening, and thought of Dad, his steady hands fixing engines, mine fixing lives. That's my legacy, not theirs. The hospital halls don't echo with Natalie's heels anymore, just the hum of my routine, my purpose. David and Natalie's lives kept spiraling. I heard they split. Mutual blame, screaming matches over money they didn't have. Natalie tried calling once, a garbled voicemail. "Jess, I'm sorry, I deleted it. No need to hear the rest. They'd lost each other, just like they'd lost me, and I didn't care to watch the wreckage. Mom got a letter from Natalie, too, begging for cash, but she tossed it in the fire. They made their bed," she said, her tone firm, and I nodded, the flames reflecting in my eyes. One spring day, I was pruning the roses, the air sweet with their scent, when Mom came out, her gray sweater loose over her frame. She sat beside me on Dad's old bench, silent for a moment, then hugged me tight. "You're my strength, Jess, like your dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. Tears welled up, spilling down my cheeks as I buried my face in her shoulder, the roses blurring red and pink around us. Every fight, every tear, every night alone, it led to this. They broke us, But we rebuilt, stronger, whole. I pulled back, smiling through the tears, and saw it in her eyes. Love, pride, a bond they couldn't touch. Now I sit here, the garden alive with birdsong, my mother's keepsake ring gleaming on my finger. Dad's ring stays in a box. A quiet memory. The past isn't a weight anymore. It's a story I survived. They thought I'd stay small, but I grew. Head nurse, daughter, keeper of this home. David and Natalie? Their footnotes, fading fast. Betrayal cuts, but rising above it? That's gold. Ever been stabbed in the back by family or love? How'd you heal, or wish you had? Tell me below. I read everyone. Like if this hit you, subscribe. What's one trust you'd never give again?